Hello everyone, got 10 dirty taxi jokes for you today. So a clearly drunk woman, stark naked, jumped into a taxi in New York and laid down on the back seat. The cab driver, an old Jewish gentleman, opened his eyes wide and stared at the woman. He made no attempt to start the cab. The woman glared back at him and said, "What's wrong with you, honey? Haven't you ever seen a naked woman before?" The old Jewish driver answered, "Let me tell you something. Lady, I wasn't staring at you like you think. That would not be appropriate where I come from." The drunk woman giggled and responded, "Well, if you're not staring at my boobs or ass, sweetie, what are you doing then?" He paused a moment, then told her, "Well, ma'am, I am looking and I am looking. And I am thinking to myself, where in the hell is this lady keeping the money to pay for this ride?" So the three men had been out at a bar, laughing and drinking the night away. As the night wore on, they became more and more drunk, and soon they found themselves stumbling down the street in search of a taxi. After a bit of wandering, they finally spotted one, and without second thought, piled into the back seat. The taxi driver could tell that they were drunk, so he came up with a plan. He pretended to start the engine and then turned it off, telling the men that they had arrived at their destination. To his surprise, the plan worked. The first man, still believing they had taken a ride, handed over some money. The second man, also believing they had a drive, thanked the driver for the ride. The third man, however, had a different reaction. He suddenly turned and slapped the driver hard across the face, yelling, "Control your speed next time. You nearly killed us." So the passenger had been in the back seat of the taxi for a while, deep in thought. He had an important meeting and a lot was riding on it. Suddenly, an idea struck him and he leaned forward to tap the driver on the shoulder, intending to ask for his opinion on the matter. But before he could even get the words out, the driver let out a blood-curdling scream and lost control of the car. The taxi swerved wildly, narrowly avoiding a bus and mounting the footpath, coming to a stop inches away from a shop window. There was a moment of stunned silence in the cab as both the passenger and the driver tried to catch their breath. Finally, the driver turned to the passenger and said, "Look, mate, don't ever do that again. You scared the daylights out of me." The passenger was horrified. He apologized profusely and said, "I didn't realize that a little tap would scare you so much." The driver took a deep breath and replied, "Sorry, it's not really your fault. Today is my first day as a cab driver. I've been driving a hearse for the last 25 years. So a woman and her 13-year-old son were inside a taxi. It was raining and all the Twilight girls were standing by the roadside. The boy asked, "Mommy, what are all those women doing?" His mother replied, "They are waiting for their husbands to come back from work." The taxi driver turned around and said, "Why don't you tell him the truth? Little boy, they are prostitutes. They sleep with men for money," said the driver. The boy's eyes got wide and asked, "Mummy, is that true?" His mother, glaring hard at the driver, replied, "Yes." After a few minutes, the boy asked, "Mummy, what happens to the babies those women have?" She replied, "Most of them become taxi drivers." So a taxi driver goes home after a very long shift. On his way home, he sees a very drunk man that can't even stay on his feet. Can't let that poor guy go home alone like this. He puts him in the passenger seat, asks him where he lives, and starts driving to his house while the drunk guy sleeps. On their way there, the taxi driver sees a woman who's incredibly hot, clearly showing skin and wearing a short skirt. "I can't let that chance go away. He thinks to himself and asks the girl if he should drive her home. She accepts and get in the back and seats middle seat. The taxi driver checks the girl in the rearview mirror and realizes she doesn't wear any underwear. I can't let the drunk guy miss this chance. He thinks to himself and wakes the drunk guy. Hey man, look in the mirror. Look in the mirror, he whispers. The drunk guy half awake looks to the mirror and says, holy shit man, I look like a pussy. So a priest is in a hurry. He runs from his home and hails a cab. When he gets in, he tells the taxi driver, I'm in a huge hurry. If I don't get to the airport in 20 minutes, I will miss my flight. No problem, says the taxi driver, and then he floors it. He drives like a maniac through the city, dogging in and out of traffic, but unfortunately runs a light and their car is hit by a massive truck. Both men die instantly. When they appear before the gates, there is a massive line. Peter suddenly yells from the front of the line to the taxi driver and tells him to come to the podium immediately. The priest follows, curious of what is happening. The taxi driver is welcomed by Peter with a hug and allowed immediately into heaven. The priest tries to follow, but is stopped, and Peter tells him that he must go to the back of the line and wait his turn. This is ridiculous. I am a priest. Why does he get to just go in and I must wait in the line? Yells the priest. Peter sighs and calmly answers, while people slept in your church during your sermons, everyone who rode with that man was praying in the back of his taxi. So it was a dark and stormy night, and a drunken man stumbled out of the local pub. Swaying as he walked, he stumbled towards a nearby taxi, fumbling for his wallet as he approached the vehicle. Reaching the car, he yanked open the door and slurred to the driver, "You have space for 10 beers and a whole chicken, right?" The taxi driver, used to dealing with inebriated passengers, simply nodded and replied, "Sure." The drunken man grinned and said, "Okay," as he leaned inside the car and vomited all over the back seat. So a foreigner enters a country and gets a taxi. On his way to the hotel, he points at an old building and asks the driver, "How long did it take to build that building?" The driver responds, 2 years. 2 years. In my country, it would have taken only 2 months, the foreigner said. After a while, the foreigner again asked, "How long did it take to build that building?" Pointing at a taller building. The driver responded, 3 years. 3 years. In my country, it would have taken only 1 year, the foreigner said. Some more time passes. The foreigner again asked, "How long did it take to build that building?" Pointing at the tallest building so far. The driver, feeling his country's reputation on the line, said, 1 month. The foreigner, not to be outdone, said 1 month. In my country, it would have taken only 15 days. A few minutes later, they passed by the country's tallest, most famous building. The foreigner naturally asks, "How long did it take to build that building?" The driver sighs and says, "How do I tell you this?" The foreigner looks confused and asks, "Tell me what?" The driver says, "On my way to the airport this morning, there was no building there." So an old lady gets into a Mercedes-Benz taxi cab. As she hops in, the driver asks her where she's going. She gives him an address, as she's just arrived to town to visit family. They keep going for a bit, when the old lady sees the very characteristic Mercedes-Benz ornament emblem mounted on the hood. "So what is that thing for?" she asks the driver. The driver sees this as a chance to prank the old woman for some laughs. "That's a sight that I had installed so I can aim my targets better," he answers. "What do you mean by targets?" she asks. "Well, you see that cyclist over there cycling along the road. Well, I hate those cyclists, so I'm going to run over him. As the woman gasps, he proceeds to accelerate and drive directly towards the unaware cyclist. But in the last moment, he turns the wheel to dodge the cyclist. But there's a loud sound that surprises the driver. What was that sound? He asks. Well, you can say whatever you want about that fancy sight of yours, but if I hadn't opened the car's door, we wouldn't have hit that goddamn cyclist. So a blonde takes a taxi to the airport. While stuck in traffic, the driver offers the blonde a riddle to help pass the time. He says, "Who is my mother's child and my father's child, but is neither my brother or my sister?" The blonde replies, "I don't know." "Who?" The driver says, "Me." They laugh hysterically, and the blonde is later dropped off at the airport where she flies home to her husband. Upon reuniting, she is anxious to tell her husband the riddle she heard. She says, "Who is my mother's child and my father's child, but is neither my brother or my sister?" Her husband replies, "I don't know." "Who is it?" The blonde says, "My taxi driver."